Hello and welcome to the Financial Wellness Hour. I am your host, Hirsch, and I am thrilled to have you here today on WGSN-DB Going Solo Network. And I hope everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving weekend. This show is for those wanting to learn more about creating financial wellness. And we are going to take different life cycles and we're going to explore them both financially and emotionally, because personal finances are usually not as much about the money as they are about the emotions associated with your finances. We may be fairly general in certain discussions, but we'd love to hear from you and make it more relevant. So you can call in or you can reach me through my website, lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial, or you can post your questions and comments on Facebook, on YouTube, or anywhere else that you might be listening. So much happens when you are going through a divorce that all too often we actually forget that we need to prepare for and to live beyond the divorce. It may have been a while since you were single, and much could have changed since then. A lot of people are getting divorced when they're 20 or 30 years into a marriage, and the world right now, not just because of COVID, is a very different world. Managing through the divorce and having a life beyond the divorce can be very different. And being aware of what is going on, focusing on beyond the divorce and beyond the process, and being deliberate in going through the process can have such a positive impact if it is done right. One of the reasons I love the topic of today's show is because we do tend to focus so much, and rightly so much on getting through the divorce that we don't focus as much on beyond the divorce. And all of a sudden, we're divorced. And now what? And what do we do? Today, we have Renee Bauer joining us to help us navigate this process and to answer the very sought after question, is there life beyond divorce? Renee is an award-winning divorce attorney who founded the Bauer Law Group. She is a divorce educator, a podcast host, a sought-after speaker, and she is the founder of Happy Even After. Besides being a self-proclaimed introvert, which I'm struggling to believe, but Renee has shared her expertise on both national and international media outlets. Renee, welcome. I am thrilled to have you on with us. Thank you.
Hi, Hirsch. Thank you so much. I'm so excited for this conversation, and I am totally an introvert.
So I have to say, one of the things that I love that you put out there is that your need to share your message is greater than your fear of speaking in a crowd. And that's a big fear to overcome. Hi, Terry. Good morning. It's good to see you, and I appreciate you listening. So I'm going to ask if you can share a little bit about your background so people really understand where this passion and this drive come from.
Yeah, so I've been a divorce lawyer for almost 2 decades now, and I've been twice divorced, and I never talked about my own divorce. So I showed up to my job all buttoned up. I was like all suited up, putting on the act, doing the job that I thought that I was hired to do, kind of click-clacking on my heels into court. But I was such a broken version of myself. So I'd get home and I would sit there and kind of like take it all off and realize that there was such a disconnect between what I do for work and how I'm helping my clients and my own internal struggles, because I did not make peace with my own past and my own divorces. And I had a good friend of mine who reached out to me and said, "Hey, I have a podcast. Can you come on? And we're just going to have a conversation. I'll bring some sushi over." And I never listened to podcasts. I'm like, "Yeah, sure. I'll answer questions for sushi." So she comes over and she clips the mic on me and she starts asking me about my divorce for the first time. And I actually started answering the questions in such an honest and raw way that I never had before. And when that episode dropped, I had so many women reach out to me and say, "That was my story too. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being vulnerable." And then it clicked. It was like a light bulb moment that I realized I don't need to keep it all in. I don't need to show up in my job a certain way. I need to show up, share my story and blend it into what I do for work and how I'm helping people, and saying, like, I get it because I've been there too. And that's where the mission comes from. It's really, it's, hey, I lived this too, and I understand. Yes, we can talk about the law, but there's so much more to talk about. And that's mindset.
And I love that. I call that not the next generation, but the new generation of divorce professionals. I think historically, when you started out 2 decades ago, it was really somebody went into it, maybe really didn't understand, the impact on somebody's life that they're making. And we see not just in the law now, we see divorce coaches, we see people like myself on the finance side, we see in all areas of people's lives where they've gone through this harrowing experience sometimes. And now they have this passion and drive. And I got to tell you, when I'm working with somebody who's been through what I've been through, especially when it's challenging like this, they've got my, they've got me as their client, as opposed to somebody who kind of does it as a job, as you say. And I want to thank you again. That's a little raw to just come out with. Obviously, you have done a lot of work on that, because usually a lot of people that haven't are keeping it very close to the chest. So I appreciate it. And that's where passion comes from, is you understand it might not be the best way to go through this process. I can make it a little better because I understand what you've been through. So that's wonderful. I love that. And we are going to focus on living beyond divorce, but I think it's important that we speak a little bit, or at least first understand kind of the situation somebody's going through when they are going through a divorce. Because to get to your life beyond, you obviously got to go through, and going through it is important. So what do you think are a couple of the stumbling blocks people need to be aware of when they go through a divorce?
Yeah. So when someone shows up to a divorce lawyer's office and they have expectations, that's usually the thing that holds them back from moving forward. That is usually the thing that drives a case straight into court, straight to trial. That's usually the thing that drives up costs. That's usually the thing that makes a divorce last a really long time. And we all hear about the horror stories of a divorce that has gone on for a year or 2 years. And it's usually because someone or both people have unreasonable expectations. So it's first getting really clear on what are reasonable expectations, and talking to a lawyer, a couple lawyers, having a couple different consultations can help you with that. And stop talking to other people who are not professionals, because everyone knows friends, uncles, brothers, cousin who went through it, and something incredible happened in their divorce, but we don't really know the background. We don't know the facts. We don't know the situation, but they're applying what happened to one person, maybe across the country, and said, well, I want that too. So that's a big one, is setting reasonable expectations. And also getting educated, really taking ownership of, okay, now I have to learn about the process, because fear keeps people stuck. And that's the thing that really terrifies people. It prevents them from moving forward. It drives emotion, because they're acting out of angst, anxiety, and almost like a panic. So really getting educated on, what does the process look like? What is required of me? What do I have to do to get organized so I understand what the financial picture looks like? And don't expect someone else to do it for you. Just because you hire a financial professional or a lawyer, you still have to understand what's happening at your end, and not just hand it over to them and say, tell me what to do. Because a lot of times a lawyer will say, well, what do you want? And they may not be guiding you to what's really happening post-divorce. Like, do you really want the house? Does it make financial sense to keep the house, or are you making an emotional decision? So I say reasonable expectations, number one, and number two is educate yourself, and don't give that off to someone else to do.
So I'm going to throw out a huge amen to all of that. And I cannot tell you how aligned in everything that you've just said. The very first question when we talk about the house, I will ask somebody is this an emotional or financial decision? And I think if people understand their priorities, they can overcome a lot of these stumbling blocks, And I say to people all the time, and I give the example of somebody who lives right next door to you, maybe going through a divorce or gone through a divorce. They're probably in a very similar home, very similar cars, similar amount of kids, similar type of family, and 100% different divorce than what you're going through. it's a very personal experience,
Absolutely.
And so I think understanding your priorities helps so much in getting through, because everything else really becomes clutter, and you can eliminate a lot of those stumbling blocks without that. And I just want to throw out a plug for the attorneys like yourself. Going in with the expectation that you can kind of throw your case over the fence to the attorney and everything is going to be great is not the way to manage your divorce. You do have responsibilities. You do need to be engaged, and you need to communicate with your attorney to be able to, for them to understand how do they need to advocate for you and what do you really want. Because too often, I think the attorney is put in a situation, with this unreasonable expectation, and then they blame the attorney, not themselves, for not being engaged or communicating.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, don't ever look to your lawyer and say, what should I do, without having some goals and some prioritized objectives. Don't rely on someone else.
No, I agree with that. This is, it's your divorce, right? It's not the attorney's. The attorney's got 20, 30, 40 going on at the time. This is your divorce. You need to make sure that you go through this, not the attorney. So, and understanding it's a very personal experience when you go through a divorce. So I'm going to ask, and this is kind of a open question, but what does a successful divorce look like?
I love when clients will come in for a consultation and they'll ask, what is your success rate? And my answer is always, well, if you want a divorce, it's 100%, because we will get you divorced. But what success means in a divorce is very different for so many different people. And I look at a successful divorce as one in which you can both attend your child's soccer game and sit next to each other. You can both attend your child's wedding and not have your child be so stressed out because they have to keep the families on opposite sides of the room. That, for me, that's above all else what a successful divorce looks like. It doesn't matter what the numbers are. There's only a range of what's going to happen in any divorce. So it's really how you come out of it, in terms of, if you are a parent and you have to co-parent, what does that co-parenting relationship look like? And if it's always conflict and always chaos, that is not successful. If you're able to say, okay, we're going to be able to co-parent from a really civil and healthy and respectful place, then that's success.
Well, I love that on so many levels, but just kind of tying it right into the show's title, right? This is part of your life beyond divorce. Yeah. That co-parenting and that ability, we're not always thinking that. If our kids are 3, 4, 5 years old, we're not thinking about their wedding 25 years later and how that's going to look and what is it going to be. So I love that. I think that is a huge goal that everybody should have on their list when they walk into the office. So some people think divorce is just crazy expensive and it's just cheaper to stay together, right? I'm going to stay married. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think it's far more expensive to live unhappily. The price that you pay for staying in something that doesn't bring you joy or peace costs a lot more than the check that you write out to your attorney to get you through that process. So yes, divorce can be expensive. It doesn't always have to be, though. If you as a couple decide to mediate, you're going to be able to keep the costs down. If you make that decision to not fight and to both concede some points and to get through the process with respect, then you can certainly keep the cost down. But I think everyone's entitled to be happy. We have a really short life to live, and it's sad. It breaks my heart when I see my own clients will say that they aren't ready, or they're going to wait until the kids graduate. They're going to put their life on hold for 8 years or more for happiness. And I think that that's a far more expensive price than the cost of the actual divorce.
It's so interesting you say that. When I say to a client something to the effect of, well, why now? Why are you pulling the trigger now? And that's a lot of what it is. Oh, I wanted to wait till the kids were, and whether it's out of college, out of high school, whatever it is. But the toll on your health potentially, right? Yeah. That becomes a very expensive thing that you're giving up from even a dollar perspective sometimes. So I pretty much warn every single client I have also that your emotions can be the most expensive part of your divorce.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you are willing to, do it amicably, if you realize this is my life, I only get one chance at it, and I want to be happy, then you can go through it in a manner that you don't have to kind of go crazy expensive, right? So I think having that perspective, which is not always easy, I get it. I've also been divorced.
Yeah.
But really, again, it comes, I think, a lot to those priorities and understanding what do you want out of life. And unfortunately, we lose a lot of that, and we lose a lot of ourselves sometimes in a marriage.
Yeah.
So
And Hirsch, I think that anytime someone says they want justice, they want to go into the courtroom because they want justice. They want the judge to hear their story. They will always be disappointed, and they will not get the justice that they think that they deserve. The judge is looking at your marriage like a business transaction, and they're going to factor in all of the things, the emotions, as a business transaction, which means most of the emotion gets removed from their decision-making process. And if you kind of flip how you're thinking about that, and you say, okay, let's just divide things up as if this is a business, then you can save yourself potentially a lot of money, because trials are very expensive and you never get what you believe is just.
So it's interesting. My divorce attorney, the very first thing he said to me is, you have to look at this as a business being dissolved, not a marriage. That was number one. And it's interesting because I've had clients say to me, well, what do you think the outcome would be if I went to court? And I said, bad. That's number one. But the other piece that people sometimes forget is, you take some of the larger cities. You take a New York, you take a Chicago, you take a Miami, and there could be 3, 4, 5 judges that handle divorce.
Oh, yeah.
And they, interpret the law a little bit differently. They have bad days, they have good days, they have biases. So it's not always easy to say right up front, if I go to court, what's it going to be like? You just don't know. And as you said, you don't get your pound of flesh. You get maybe an ounce of it if you do, right? You never come out feeling gratified and happy about that outcome, because you've still got to live with everything that's happened and everything that's to come. So why not focus on having it be a great outcome in the way of, beyond my divorce, I can live an amazing life. And by the way, not have to spend an extra 80, 100, 150,000 to go to court if I can avoid that. And that comes to your emotions, right? So
absolutely.
So one of the things that you said earlier that I just want to come back to, and I think, and it was your personal story. I wrote down here, broken version of yourself. And, I think this talks a little bit to, I talk about, you need 2 teams. You need kind of a professional team, and you need an emotional team, right? And this talks a little bit to what you were saying as well, in the emotions, in trying to get your pound of flesh and all the rest. On your professional side, there's a lot of people you can have. A divorce attorney is kind of that quarterback, using a very male analogy, but they're the ones that often coordinate with the other professionals. Right. But each professional has their very specific case or very specific piece of it. I'm going to ask, though, if you can talk a little bit about using those teams, right? I mean, on the emotional side, I should throw in, I always set the rule, and I know I can't always set the rule with clients, but that the people that you let into your emotional team have to be positive people, not people who've been through a divorce and bitter.
Yes.
That doesn't help you, right? So I'm going to ask if you can talk a little bit about kind of your team and again, the responsibility, I guess, really that you have as the person going through divorce in, working with these teams and helping you get that outcome.
Yeah, I always say that you don't need everybody, but you do need somebody on your team. And that usually team is more than one person. So you have your lawyer, and that's kind of like the thing that everyone says, okay, I'm getting divorced, I absolutely need to have a lawyer. But some people need a CDFA, and that person is extremely instrumental in helping someone really spend the time going through the numbers, because a lot of times lawyers don't do that. And that's not part of what their job is. They're negotiating an agreement, but they're not sitting with the clients and saying, okay, let's look at a budget. Let's project what your living expenses are going to look like post-divorce. And I always recommend a CDFA for someone who has not been the primary person who has paid the bills or has really had their hands in the finances. That's a great person to have on your team. I think a mental health professional, a therapist, a counselor it should be a requirement. No matter when you're going through divorce, no matter if you want it or you don't want it, it is really, really, really hard. And you go through all kinds of different emotions, and having someone who is on your side, but is also neutral. And it's like what you said before, Hirsch. You don't want someone who bash your ex or make things worse and heighten the emotions. You really want someone who is going to neutralize them and just be a support system for you. So a mental health professional, I think anyone going through a divorce, if you've never been to a therapist before, now is the time to go to one, because, your friends are great, but at some point they don't want to necessarily hear all of the drama as well. So really putting it in its place. So those three people, the lawyer, the CDFA, and the mental health professional, are the ones that I think are the most common. You can certainly, there's this divorce coaching is a new thing, or a newer thing, which I think is fabulous, because that is like having a best friend support you through the process in a way that is a positive way, and is also kind of like your tough love cheerleader. They're not just telling you what you want to hear, but they're kind of calling you out and holding you accountable and making sure you continue to move forward rather than looking back. Now, of course, that's going to be something, if you have some extra money, that might be something nice to have, but it's not a requirement to have in every divorce.
And by the way, that's not something your friends are going to do, right? That
Right.
Tough love, call you out when you need to be called out, kind of thing. And I think it's so important that you have the right people doing the right things for you. I've learned a lot about the law, but I am not a lawyer, right? I will work with you, and there's strategies that each one knows how to help you through that the others don't. And we were talking earlier about how it can be crazy expensive. Well, it doesn't have to be. If you use the right professionals for the right support, it really gets you through. I mean, I'll give you one example is understanding a financial strategy is not your therapist and not your attorney's, role. One of the things I do with a budget that you were mentioning is I'll say to people, hey, let's look at your essential spend only, because we know that's your threshold you cannot go under when you negotiate. And now, based on those priorities we spoke about earlier in the show, let's build your life where you absolutely want it to be. Well, we may not get all of that, but we at least now know our negotiation range and where we're willing to come in and where we're not. So having just even that simple strategy can help you significantly, because I've had people say to me, Hirsch, we're there. The document's drawn up. We have to fill in how much she gives me a month. And I said, I don't know. All right, well, let's figure it out, right? But again, working ahead of time and looking beyond, again, the theme of the show, but is just so vitally, vitally important. And we do have to get to a break, and you can see, well, everyone's listening as well, but I'm going to ask if you can share how people can get in touch with you. And because, as you know, with a podcast, not everybody's reading the screen, if you can spell out anything that might need to be spelled out, but how can people get in touch with you?
Sure. So Instagram is my favorite place to kind of hang out. It's sort of the hub of where I have everything going on. So you can connect with me there at Ms. Renee Bauer. And I have a podcast, which you can find on all major listening platforms. And that's Happy Even After with Ms. Renee Bauer.
And I recommend that you go to both. I also recommend that you go to Renee's website as well, which will be a slew of information. That's wonderful information as well. But listen to that podcast. There are a lot of great shows on there. And we will be right back. We have to take a break. Hello and welcome back to WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. My guest today is Renee Bauer, and we are speaking about, is there life after divorce? And I'm going to run through, I made some notes, going to run through some of the things we've covered. I'm sure I didn't get it all, but I want to thank you again for sharing your story and sharing about the broken version of yourself, and that you felt that kind of chasm in your work life and your internal life, and kind of, I guess, reconciling that to be one life, I guess, in many ways, right? Um, we also spoke about some of the stumbling blocks that people go through and how to avoid them, and prioritizing and looking beyond kind of the challenge of today, focusing, as I said, beyond the divorce, not just through the divorce. We spoke a little bit about what a successful divorce looks like, and that doesn't mean the day you sign it. It means kind of the rest of your life and how it carries into the rest of your life as well. Spoke about the divorce and the cost of divorce versus staying, and the emotional toll and other tolls of staying, and some ways in which you can reduce those costs as well. And building reasonable expectations, working and communicating and taking ownership of your divorce as you go through the divorce and work with your professional teams. So a lot of things that we covered, and all in about 21 minutes. So we're going to, I'm sure, pack the rest of the show as well. So I'm going to just kind of dive straight in, right? If you're the one who is looking to get the divorce, you want the divorce, how do you kind of deal with, I could be breaking up my family, and then reconciling the guilt that might come with that with your own happiness, and quite honestly, understanding the changing dynamic of all of this together, right? So how do you kind of reconcile those two?
So such a great question. And it's probably one of the most difficult emotions or questions to answer when you're going through a divorce. And, I just had this conversation with someone in my private Facebook community because they were struggling with it. And I said to them, usually the other person knows that there's something not working as well. They may not want to take action, but they recognize that something is not right, or something is broken, something is unhealthy or toxic. And so when you make that decision, someone has to make it. And when you are the one to make that decision, you're just getting the things, you're getting momentum, you're getting things rolling. So you both can get through the process and get into the next version of your life. And it is, it's so, the guilt will eat you up. Guilt as a parent will eat you alive, and guilt as to what you're doing for the family, or what you think you're doing for the family. And, the studies all show that it is not the divorce that causes issues with children, it's the conflict. And if you're in a situation or in a relationship where it's extremely high conflict, you are doing such a service to, or disservice to, your children by staying in that, because they're going to model what healthy relationships look like. If you're showing them that a relationship is supposed to be high conflict, or parents not talking to each other, or there's a lot of yelling, that's what they're going to bring into their own adult lives. And so if you try to just pivot the way you think about this and say, okay, my children deserve the gift of seeing what a healthy relationship looks like, seeing what healthy parents look like. And while your soon-to-be ex may not agree with you in that moment, at some point they will catch up to where you are now. And usually one person's always a little bit ahead of it emotionally. The person who wants it has already reconciled and kind of gone through all of it. And the other person feels blindsided. We'll hear that a lot. They feel blindsided. And it might take them a little bit to catch up to where you are, but they do. And, I use my own personal example as this. My first marriage, my ex-husband is a really good man, a great father. He and I were not a good fit together. And now he is in the life that he's supposed to be in. He's with the person he's supposed to be with, who is a good fit for him. And I am married to the person I'm supposed to be with. And yes, it was horrible when we were going through it, and it felt awful. And I had all of those feelings of guilt, but I wouldn't change anything for the world, because now we're both in a place where we are in alignment with who we are as people and in relationships. So you have to work through the feelings, allow the wave of emotions to kind of come and go, and just check yourself and say, okay, what is it that I know is true to me, and what decisions do I need to make that might be really, really hard, but ultimately will lead to your best version of your life and the happiest version.
My show last week was actually called Divorce, Am I Going to Screw Up the Kids? And so I love that you've just said this, because we do have this fear. And if you ask anybody and you say to them, do you want to screw up your kids? You're going to get this resounding, like, no way. What are you talking about? You're crazy, right? But we don't realize that if we behave in certain ways, they see everything, they absorb everything, as you said. And if there's ever a time to role model through adversity and show that you don't have to go down that rabbit hole, this is it. And it's not an easy thing to be cognizant of it, but kids see it and they are impacted by it. So I think what you said is so, so important.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. Divorce is hard. There's no way to sugarcoat it. It is hard stuff. You can't, you can't go over it or under it or around it. You just got to plow through it and, work through all of the stuff that comes up as you're going through the process.
This is a study that I read probably about 6 or 7 years ago already. They said the three biggest fears and challenging times of somebody is the death of a loved one, divorce, and then uprooting a family, like for a relocation. Those are all where you are doing something to your family. Yeah. So yes, absolutely, it's huge. And just so you know, by the way, the third biggest fear of CEOs is public speaking. So you're in good company. I meant to say that earlier.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, and sorry, it was the number one fear. The number three was death. Sorry, that's what it was. So you're in very good company. That's what it was.
That's funny. Death is less scary than public speaking.
Yeah. So, all too often when we hear people got divorced or they jumped into a relationship, we hear about the rebound relationships, that they have these huge highs. Oh, I've met the greatest guy, and a week later, it sours quickly. Is there a right time to start dating?
I have asked this question to dating coaches and professionals, and because I always like getting other people's input, there isn't a right time. I think that there's a wrong time, and I think when you're trying to quick fix your emotions, when you're trying to mask any pain or loneliness, and so you're plugging somebody in to fill that time, that's the wrong time, because you're not going to make good decisions then, and you're not going to pay attention to red flags. The right time is different for everyone. For some people, I heard it's a year. I've heard other people say it's 2 years. I heard someone say 6 months because they had already emotionally gone through the divorce much sooner than that. So it's not, the question isn't when is the right time. It's when is the wrong time. And if you're just trying to fix a feeling that you're having, or you're trying to, really just quick fix the pain, the grief, the loneliness, then that's not the right time for you to start dating.
Yeah, when you talk time, time on a clock is very different to time as to readiness.
Yeah.
And again, this comes back to, as we've said earlier a few times already, this is a very personal experience. You do see these people at 2 months out of a divorce, they meet somebody and they have a long-term relationship, but that might not be the right thing for you. And it doesn't mean anything's wrong with you either, by the way. That's the other thing I find a lot of my clients will say, what's wrong with me? Well, everyone else who's divorced is fine. You may be not ready, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. I'd rather you not jump into something that's wrong for you than wait around and do it right. So
it's a great point. Don't compare yourself to other people's timetables. I just had a woman on my podcast that she was post-divorce and decided that she was not committing to anyone, and she was going to date as many people as she could. I mean, that just exhausts me even thinking about it. But that was what she wanted to do because she had been in such a long-term marriage, and that felt right for her. So you have to do what feels really right for you.
And I'll come back to, the very first blog I ever wrote, by the way, was called Divorce is Awesome, right? And everyone said to me, that's not a good title. And I thought it was, but I changed it. But I changed it to Perspective is Everything. And really, if you've been in a long-term relationship like that, 20 years, 30 years, the longest I've had a couple were married 42 years, and they were getting divorced. And neither one of them had a clue who they were. And that might be the right thing for you, because it is different today. So getting out there, dating a lot of people, if that's the right thing for you, then maybe that's what you need to do, but that might not be the right thing for everybody, right? So again, putting it in your perspective of who you are, I think becomes very, very.
Yeah. And I think divorce can be awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I think it creates an enormous opportunity.
Yeah.
You've got this negativity in your life, and it often consumes your life, right? Because you walking on eggshells, you ignoring each other, you whatever it is. And now there's this kind of void because you don't have all this energy in your life that was there, and you get to fill it, and that's the opportunity.
Absolutely.
And talking about that, I mean, there are people that get stuck in their despair and they can't pull out of it or can't get over the hurt. So what is something they can maybe do to move on?
So what I always tell people is that in any clients I have, there are two types. They're the ones that stay stuck, and then they're the ones that move forward and ultimately can say divorce is awesome. And the difference is the questions that they're asking has everything to do with which person you become. So one person is going to look back and they're going to say, how am I going to survive financially? What am I going to do by myself? Am I always going to be alone? What am I going to do when my kids are with the other parent? And the problem is they're looking for all kinds of external resolutions. They want their ex to give them more money. They want their lawyer to solve all of their problems. And they're constantly looking outside. The other person is saying, okay, what can I do with my time when my child is with their other parent? What can I do so that I know I can afford my bills? What can I do so that I don't feel so lonely? And they're looking inside for solutions. And the difference is they're looking at things that are keeping them up at night, the same things that the other person is, but they're saying, how can I fix this problem? And that is the difference between someone who stays stuck and someone who moves forward. And it's so clear to me when I have clients, based on the type of questions they're asking, which one that they will be. And often the person who says, okay, yes, I'm going to have less money to live, but now how can I fix that? How can I reduce my expenses? How can I make changes in my life so that I'm financially comfortable? Those are the ones who are happy after divorce. Those are the ones who say divorce is awesome because they have figured out how to control and create the life that they want, compared to the person who's stuck and because they're constantly looking back and saying, I need to bring my ex back to court for more money. I need to go back to my lawyer for this. And they're continuously going back. So to answer the question, ask yourself, what can you do to change the circumstance or fix the things that are keeping you up at night, and turn internal and to answer those rather than looking to the external.
And you've given a lot of enormously useful information, but I just want to say this is a huge tip, because if you are stuck in a rut, instead of looking for a solution, ask yourself the question, right? Are you looking to solve, or are you looking for somebody else to solve what's going on? And that automatically can help you put and reframe the issue that's at hand, as opposed to who's going to solve this, how am I going to solve this, can really change the whole dynamic of what we're speaking about. And I'm going to jump a little bit further along in the post-divorce side of things. We go through a lot, we move forward, we get to the stage, we hopefully meet an amazing person. And this is actually a group or demographic, I'm not sure exactly how to term it, that I've been working with more frequently, and that is families that are blending. Can you share a little bit, like some tips maybe for people who are looking to blend families?
Yeah, communication is everything. When you blend families, you can run up against a lot of different challenges, different parenting styles, different rules in houses. So having communication first with your partner about setting some boundaries as to, okay, what are the house rules that we're going to share with the kids? We're going to sit them all down at a family meeting and say, okay, here are the house rules, rather than just assuming everyone's bringing the previous house rules that they had and into this new one. So setting some boundaries with the kids, setting some boundaries even with your partner as to what's your role as a step parent. What would you like me to do to support you as a parent? What should I not do? Are we talking about like having a conversation about discipline? Is discipline something that a step parent is going to do or not do? Or are they just going to be the person to parent and enforce rules and make sure no one, gets hurt? So it's having open conversation and frequent conversation, because resentment can build up and people are kind of plugging along, doing their thing, and they default to how things used to be. And if you're not coming back to the table and saying, let's have a conversation, let's have a family meeting and talk about this, so everyone feels part of it and everyone can understand. So the kids can understand, okay, here's why we're doing this. And it's not just all these new rules being thrust on them and all of a sudden they blame the other parent, when maybe dad was easygoing with rules and now stepmom has all of these crazy rules. Like, sit down and have a conversation. And I think communication is really the number one thing in order to help people eliminate the resentment, and everyone gets on the same page.
I think people need to be aware of what they're bringing into the marriage, whether it's a financial obligation or an emotional bias or anything like that. And then what are the new obligations, the new dynamics that are being, and you're not going to think of every single thing, but the more that you do, the better it will be and the easier that transition will be. Because the last thing that I want somebody one day, when I find somebody and I get remarried, the last thing I want their kid to say is, you're not my father, you can't tell me that, right?
Yeah.
That sets you back potentially years in the relationship even. So understanding that communication is so important, building the right expectations in the right way is, and being a unified front as partners when you deliver that, I think. I have a million other questions. I'm going to slide one more in.
All right.
I'm going to slide two in. One is going to be at the end of answering the question. Will you just help people, remind them again how they can get in touch with you? But, everyone kind of has their own style as a professional. So I'm going to ask if you can just share, somebody's listening, they want to reach out to Renee and they call you, they reach out through your email, your website, however. How do you get the ball rolling with them so that they understand, this is how we're going to start our journey?
Yeah, so my divorce practice is in Connecticut. So if you're outside of Connecticut, we can't help. In terms of being a divorce attorney, but so much of what I do is also divorce education, which is a much broader reach. So I have an online course called the D course, which is all about education. It's to help you set reasonable expectations, to deal with the shame of divorce, to start thinking about parenting plans and how to divide personal property in a really easy, cost-effective way. So I would say education is going to be the first thing that you want to do, and the way anyone can work with me. So you can reach out and I can get you the information in order to sign up for that. It's called the D course. And again, that can be found on FamilyLawyerCT.com website, or if you send me a message through Instagram at Ms. Renee Bauer, I check them and I respond to everything, so we can certainly link up there. I have a private Facebook group for women who are going through divorce. Also, it's completely free. It's a support, an awesome community of other women cheering each other on. And I show up there every week and do a live and answer some Q&A. I do a ton of mindset coaching around divorce.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I encourage everybody, please do reach out. Renee, thank you for shedding such wonderful light and sharing your experiences and your insights. And so as we see, there is life after divorce, and it can be quite an amazing life. So I encourage you to reach out to Renee, to listen to her podcast, to go and listen and sign up for the D course. As I said, there is so much on her website that you can gain from, and from Renee herself, not just on the website. After all, you only kind of get one chance at going through your divorce. So do it in the right way, in the best way. I am Hirsch Simon, your host for the Financial Wellness Hour. Please reach out to me through my website, lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial. You can reach out to me or to Renee Bauer for any questions that you might have that you didn't post. A very happy birthday to, and a very big thank you to CC Schatz, my producer, for making the magic happen behind the scenes. Enjoy your cruise coming up next week. I look forward to everybody joining me on my next show, All You Need to Know About Mediation. Have a great week, and thank you for tuning in.